Okay, great. So, okay, let's start. So, first of all, I will introduce myself. My name is Valeria Gergieva, and currently I'm a visiting research fellow at the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy at the University of Hamburg. As also, I'm a non-resident research fellow at Odessa Center for Nonproliferation. So, and I want to welcome you at the Black Sea Experts NucTalks. Today we will have a special session as all of the speakers today are my close friends and colleagues, so it is a special honor to be a moderator today. And our topic today is also as timely as ever. It is deployment of the Russian tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, risks of the escalation and influence on non-proliferation regime. And during this NucTalk, esteemed experts will share their expertise and perspectives on this matter. They will explore the risk associated with the deployment of Russian tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus and discuss the potential impact on the broader non-proliferation regime. We will also talk about NATO policy regarding this issue and, of course, Ukrainian reaction. Today's NucTalks are quite also symbolic, I think, as well as today it is the beginning of the NATO summit, where the question of Ukrainian NATO membership is on the highest agenda. But before we start, I want to tell a few words also about our Black Sea Expert NucTalks. It is an initiative of the Black Sea Women in the Nuclear Network. The main goal of NucTalks is to increase awareness about the most relevant issues and news, research, also recent research, and also to share their ideas and expertise in the nuclear field, non-proliferation, nuclear security. Of course, also conducting NucTalks, we try to promote our network and its members and to invite new members. I want to stress that this network, it's not only a network for women, but for men as well. And men are very much welcomed to this network. You can easily become a member on our website, and I will add the link for the website to our chat. So what about our agenda? So usually we listen all speakers and only then we open floor for Q&A and discussion. But today we will have a small change. Firstly, we will listen to the first speaker and I will open the floor for the questions. And then we will listen other three speakers and again open the floor for Q&A session. So it's my special, I would say, honor and pleasure to introduce the first speaker. It's Dr. Polina Sinovets. She's the head of Odessa Center for Nonproliferation. Currently, she's a visiting fellow at the NATO Defense College. Previously, she was a research fellow at the Foundation for Strategic Research in Paris, where she will begin her fellowship again in autumn. Additionally, Dr. Sinovets is an associate professor at the Department of International Relations at Odessa Mechnikov National University. In 2006, she was a research fellow at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies. In 2015, she was a fellow at NATO Defense College again in Rome. And in 2017, she was a Fulbright scholar at the CNS office in Washington, D.C. She's an expert in nuclear weapons policy, arms control, deterrence, and everything which is connected with Russia and nuclear weapons. So Dr. Polina Sinovets will start, and please prepare your questions and comments just after her speech, because as she's a visiting fellow at NATO Defense College, she has an important meeting at 4, so she will leave us at 4 o'clock. So please, Polina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Valeria. It's a special pleasure. So when you were introducing yourself, I just thought that I also have a very strange status of non-resident head of Odessa Center for Nonproliferation. But can the head be non-resident then? And what happens when the head is not resident in the body? This is still the open question, of course. Well, I have today I would say, big responsibility to give the information for everyone in the way not to bore them too much, because 2/3 of the audience has already listened to me before at one or the other conference. But the other thing is that some of the representatives who were listening to me hasn't remembered anything, just pictures of President Putin. That is why today I have no presentation, because otherwise you'll still remember the pictures of President Putin. So especially for those who remember pictures, I will speak now, and then you remember only me. Russian nuclear weapons deployment in Belarus. Again, one can regard it from the different standpoints. However, I would say this is a part of the broader Russian deterrence strategy. And what is interesting is that Russians, they don't really see the big difference between deterrence and coercion. As far as sometimes people ask me to explain what is deterrence and what is coercion and what is difference, then deterrence is the basic function of preventing other states from attacking you anyhow, anywhere. And coercion is the broader function, and sometimes is attributed to deterrence when you make a threat to use nuclear weapons to make somebody to do something else, a part of attacking you or not attacking you. So for Russians, it's all the same. And since February of the last year, they were using nuclear weapons, mainly the umbrella to prevent the West from defending Ukraine with the soldiers from the boots on the ground. And also one other function was to try to curse the West to stop supplying arms to Ukraine. Initially, it showed certain results. Also in February of the last year, responding to the Ukrainian requirement of the no-fly zone, President Putin declared that he put his nuclear forces on high alert, and that at some point triggered a very predictable response from the United States, who canceled the deal of Poland supplying UN MiG-29 bombers. But then, as far as Russia was using its deterrence threat every month, then it was not really possible to keep on believing in Russia's strong response and forever. And then there were just a couple of also very important messages coming from Russia, where we can see that Russia was really doing its best, not only the mass media or like crazy politicians or funny politicians admitting Medvedev, but serious ones. I mean, the serious one means Vladimir Putin. So here I would like to emphasize, to attract your attention to a couple of his speeches. Of course, the first one where he warned everyone not to interfere in the conflict, threatening with the nuclear weapons consequences. The second one is the May speech where he tried to curse the West from supplying long-range arms to Ukraine. And when the United States reacted that they are not going to, we're not going to. And then the last one, the September speech, when he warned everyone from trying to take the annexed territories, the territories annexed from Ukraine, to take it from Russia. Again, saying that Russia can use whatever means possible to do this. Actually, as we see, territories were taken. Some of the territories were taken by Ukraine, in particular Kherson, and again, they didn't stay near Kiev. So a lot of territories were taken back, and now there is a counteroffensive operation. Nothing happened. Again, more and more weapons are supplied by the West to Ukraine, and nothing happens. And that is why at some point Putin understood that his version is not that efficient. Of course, one of the most dangerous moments was the autumn of last year when Putin's speech, however, at the same moment, Putin's speech was met by the US administration's strong signal sent to Russia, saying that any nuclear weapons used against Ukraine in case of the effective counteroffensive operation will be punished by the conventional operation of the United States and their allies. That is why actually coercion, I would say that Russian coercion at some point failed, met by the deterrent threat of the West. And this is why Putin understood that playing with escalation is not that easy, and it's quite dangerous, and it's quite unpredictable. And it's quite dangerous for him in particular because one of the other threat, which was coupled the threat of conventional strike on Russian territory was the threat of personal demolition of Putin, which was probably the most significant signal for him. This is why he decided to play still in the nuclear field, however, to play with the other types of threats. So there was his speech to the Federal Assembly, where he canceled the New START treaty, where he threatened to start testing nuclear weapons in case if the US would cross the line. And also, the latest threat was the threat of deployment of Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus, which is actually should come true, already came true this month. And so the main question, of course, what does it mean? On my point of view, it means still the part of that dialogue of gestures. And as far as Putin now doesn't like to speak a lot because he's afraid of some kind of responses from the West, he likes to show moves. And it was certainly a move threatening that any kind of future escalation is possible. Especially sometimes if we read Russian authors, we'll see that sometimes it's interpreted as the threat to escalate against Poland. And now, again, if we look at the popular Russian authors' publications during the recent months, then we'll see 3 publications of Dmitry Trenin threatening, starting from threatening Poland, saying that Russia has all legitimate ground to strike Poland as the main hub of supply of arms to Ukraine. And also then there was an article of Karaganov, calling for striking on Poznan. Of course, all these articles were met with the strong response even from the Russian audience, even from the Russian experts. However, I would say that they probably were playing the role of additional warning to the West, like as far as Putin can't doesn't like to speak about any kind of threats of escalation. Somebody should have told that, and probably those analysts are the ones who are trusted to tell that, guys, this is all made for Poland. This is all made to warn you that any other weapon supply or any other significant step from the side of the West will be punished with some escalation, and this escalation may happen against Poland. If we speak about the other implications of Russian nuclear weapons deployment, in Belarus, I don't see many because Russia still can target all the territory of Europe from Crimea with Caliber missiles. It also can target half of Europe with, if not all, with the Iskander missiles deployed in Kaliningrad Oblast, which is not that far from Belarus and which is even closer to Europe. This is why it's not a big deal for Russia to, there is nothing about really operational necessity of Belarus, as I believe. It's more about a symbolic move. It's more about a threat, which Putin wanted to send to the West, showing that Russia is reacting for the Western behavior, that Russia is still involved in this escalation game strategy, and that it can end up, any kind of the continuation of the Western support to Ukraine can end up with some kind of threatening things. As you see, there were no threats vocalized by Putin himself. There were no threats vocalized by Russian politicians about nuclear weapons in Belarus, but everyone understands that this is a practical move, and sometimes the West it appreciates more of a practical moves than theoretical ones, because if, for example, we look at the French nuclear strategy, now we don't see any words from President Macron, but the fact that they have changed one nuclear submarine at sea, the retaliatory nuclear submarine at sea, 3 in their consideration, this is a very strong signal to Russia that it may end up with some grave consequences. I don't think that this is a very good strategy, because you don't really understand what in particular can end up with what. But I think that Russia really tried to follow that kind of path, showing certain actions to the West not words, because Putin is already fed up with words and that negotiations with the West and the threats from the West. This is why now they are trying to threaten silently, pretending nothing is happening. However, really, if it was, if Belarus really had a operational value, then it would never happen in that kind of like loud mode. When I think that when it will be opened, soon President Lukashenko will start to cut the stripe nearby. They will show the exact place of location of this nuclear weapons and so on. So this is not made for any kind of operational necessity. This is something which is really to signify some things. Also, of course, to tie Belarus to Russia, even closer. Of course, when President Lukashenko says, I will make an order, it sounds really funny because he will never probably make an order because he doesn't have the opportunity to do this. Of course, I'm even not sure that Belarus will have a voice in making up the decisions regarding using nuclear weapons from Belarus, that I think that all these weapons will be controlled solely by Russia. And this is why this is just one more element of control of Russia over Belarus. And in this regard, some Belarusian experts, I'm already finishing, I see that it's close to the end. Some Belarusian experts, they say that, unlike the others, that they don't think that Lukashenko was really happy with that, because usually when he's happy with some event, he's trying to take this event to publicize it, to make it much more loud. And they say when Putin declared about the deployment of nuclear weapons in Belarus, Lukashenko was keeping silence for quite a long time for him. And this is why it looks as if he was really shocked with what happened. And then, of course, now he's trying to use it for his own benefit. However, this is a, how to say, nice face with a bad game. This is probably all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Polina. So please, your questions and comments. If there are, oh, great. Ilya Snigur, please introduce shortly yourself when you ask questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Firstly, I'm glad to see you all here in the Zoom. My name is Ilya Snigur. I just finished the second year of the undergraduate studies in Odessa National University, named after Ilya Ilyich Mechnikov, the Faculty of International Relations. And my question is, can we think that after the rebellion of Prigozhin and the disgraceful runaway Putin from Moscow to St. Petersburg, is it possible to think that such a weakened person as the Putin, who fears everything, can give an order to strike with the nuclear weapons? Is it possible to think that the Putin's and his political system as strong as it seemed before the Prigozhin's rebellion? Because the nuclear strike, to give an order for nuclear strike, is such a strong decision. But if we see that Putin fears such a small person as Prigozhin, how we can talk about the nuclear strike, which can end it all? So,
first of all, thank you, Ilya, for your question, but I don't think that Putin really fears Prigozhin. I mean, we can say whatever, but in this situation, there can be many other grounds of their reconciliation, sort of reconciliation. But as for performing nuclear strike, I don't think that Putin is interested to perform nuclear strike. I don't think that Putin is a maniac, because only a maniac can do this. I don't think that Putin is intended to perform nuclear strike. I just think that even Putin, as any person under the extreme circumstances, is eager to behave contrary to the common sense, contrary to his own usual patterns of behavior, because he's on the margin. So I think that getting to extremes would be some kind of very grave circumstances for Putin's regime. The situation when he will feel that the only way to keep power in Russia is to demonstrate the bigger power, like nuclear weapons, or to, if he would tightly connect, let us say, Crimea with his own legitimacy, saying that somebody will tell him, if we are losing Crimea, then you are not a president tomorrow. I mean, to use nuclear weapons, she should understand that this is the best alternative from the other alternative, And the other alternative can be just because using nuclear weapons has a very strong, it's a very strong, how to say, well, there is a very strong chance that it would end up with the war and even with nuclear war, and then he will be destroyed. This is why the other outcome should be better, than this one. So this is his own personal existence, and then if he'll feel that his own personal existence is undermined, is threatened, that he's standing on the verge, and the only chance to keep on this legitimacy is using nuclear weapons. I think he can do this.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you, Natalia. Close.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Polina, for your presentation and the speech. When I'm listening to you, I feel more safe, I would say, because you have so deep knowledge in Russian situation and all this nuclear weaponizer history of Russian Federation, how they want to threaten everybody. So I remember. Sorry, let me introduce myself. I'm Natalia Klos. I'm coordinator of the Black Sea Women and Nuclear Network. I have a question because I was reading somewhere in the news or some expert comments too, not you, that there is no sign that Russia literally deliver already a nuclear weapon to the Belarus, and there will be no sign that Russia will deliver physically a nuclear weapon to Belarus. So maybe I missed something. Is there something changed? They already delivered the systems to the Belarus territory, or what happened recently? All this, is it possible?
They say that yes, but nobody really noticed that delivery. This is why it means that everything maybe yes, maybe no, maybe usually those things can be tracked, but we can't exclude something. So it's better no than yes, but still we should also always have a doubt regarding this kind of intelligence and satellite information.
Yeah, I have seen in Twitter, I guess 2 days ago, the news that Lukashenko said that it's already there, don't worry, and US can't find it and see where it is, so something like this, but it's Lukashenko's speech, so it's something.
Never believe
Lukashenko,
and yes, and those are such a small weapons that he is carrying it in his pocket. That is why nobody can track it, probably. So he can say this as well to show that he is a powerful man.
Yeah.
Which is
okay.
not.
I saw this Twitter. That's why I was asking, because like it was different opinion. Like in reality, how people are literally tracking what happened. Does it deploy it or not? Right. Yeah.
I think it's no. If Lukashenko said yes, then it's no.
Yeah, when he says yes and tries to be loud, then this is a sign that something is going in the different direction.
Yep. Please, Aderita, your question.
Yes. Hi. First of all, thank you for the invitation to participate on the Black Sea Women in Nuclear. So I have a question to Polina. I agree with everything that she says, but since we are coming to, to the upcoming Vilnius NATO summit, one of the things that we've been discussing is Ukraine's, membership at the alliance. Of course, it seems that, according even to President Biden, that it's not the right time to do that. But at the same time, allies are talking about providing security assurances or guarantees somehow to Ukraine. Do you think that in that sense, this kind of security assurances guarantees that we are not sure if they are coming out of this summit, they will take into account any kind of threat from Belarus?
You mean nuclear threat? I don't think that this is the first concern, because you can perform nuclear strike on Ukraine from any part, especially from the Black Sea, from calibers which are used against Ukraine every day. And so any caliber can carry is a dual-use missile. It can carry nuclear warhead. So there is no point of using Belarus for that. Only because as far as we heard that they said that the West sent Russia warning that first of all the conventional strike will be against forces involved in this nuclear strike on Ukraine. This is why of course we can suspect that Putin has a malign intention to do it from Belarus, and then let Belarus feel the burden and the pain of the consequent situations. But I don't think that it's so bad at the moment. I mean, that people of Belarus will be used just to be exposed to any kind of conventional strikes. This is why I don't think that Belarus has special meaning in that. Again, as for regarding security assurances for Ukraine, I don't see real assurances in the way we would like to have them. Of course, there will be assurance to supply Ukraine with arms as long as it takes, to support Ukraine politically, economically, and socially and financially. But I don't believe that Ukraine will, maybe I'm too skeptical, that Ukraine will gain some kind of real viable assurances from the West that it will be anyhow defended. Apart from this indirect support with weapons or whatever. And I also don't really believe in any kind of additional security assurances apart from NATO membership. So I think that NATO membership is still the only viable option, which is not attainable at the moment till the war goes on. Maybe it will become available after the end of the war, especially if Ukraine will finish the task successfully. But now we'll probably receive the invitation to join sometime in the future.
Thank you. I guess we have time for one more question. Okay, then I will ask. You partly already answered this question, but anyway, I want to stress this. How does the presence of Russian tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus contribute to the overall defense capabilities of Belarus and its ability to deter potential threats? Are there maybe any unique advantages or considerations for Belarus in this regard? Because you already said that it's mostly for status, yes, and it will be controlled by Russia, but nevertheless, does Belarus has any additional advantages in this regard? Does this status means something?
I think that actually it just would mean that if anybody is planning any kind of military operation against Belarus, it will be much more carefully made or even cancelled because of these potential nuclear weapons deployed there. Also, of course, as far as we have always regarded nuclear weapons, US nuclear weapons deployed in Europe as sort of a wedding ring for those states, meaning the real alliance. I mean, this is a symbol of the real alliance. Then probably nuclear weapons in Belarus would also mean the wedding ring of Belarus. So the high meaning of Belarus to Russia. However, even if we look at the Russia's foundation of nuclear deterrence, we'll see that allies are considered to be one of the primary sub-objects of being defended and deterred by Russian nuclear deterrence strategy. This is why on paper, officially, theoretically, Belarus has always, as Russian ally, Belarus has always been defended by Russian nuclear deterrence. However, now Russia is supposed to be even more connected to Belarus and even more caring about Belarus as its own territory, I would say. But I don't think that Belarus has been in the less danger, regarding the West than now, because if anything, real, military escalation happens, then there is a high probability that Russian nuclear weapons base would be taken out, even by conventional strike in Belarus. So Belarus is becoming more of a target to the West than probably it was before.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Polina, for finding time to join. I hope you can stay till 4.
Yeah, I'll still stay and listen. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I know that you're very busy lately with a range of events, so thank you for finding time. And
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, so let's go on with the next speaker. It's also my friend already, I would say, and a great colleague, Tim Tees. I hope I finally know, like, pronouncing your surname correctly after 1 year. So Tim Tees joined the IFSH in August 2021. He works as a researcher in the working group on arms control and emerging technologies. The working group is a part of a 2 years cooperation between IFSH and the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and is embedded in the International Research Network Rethinking Nuclear Deterrence. In addition, Tim is a PhD candidate at the Institute for Management Research at the Radboud University in Netherlands. Until late 2022, Tim Tees was part of the research and transfer project Arms Control and Emerging Technologies. Previously, he was a visiting fellow at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies in Monterey. He studied international relations at Green Valley University of Applied Sciences in Kyiv and graduated from IFSH postgraduate master program Peace and Security Studies. Tim Tees is an alumnus of the National Academic Scholarship Foundation and a member of the Trilateral Young Deep Cuts Commission. So you have a great bio, Tim. So please, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Valeria, for the kind introduction and for organizing this timely event. With the announcement that Russia will deploy nuclear weapons to Belarus, I think it's again trying to dial up the anxiety about nuclear weapons in those countries, supporting Ukraine. And so I think it's crucial to have an informed debate about what's going on the ground in Belarus, as we have here today, and also about what implications that has for those countries supporting Ukraine. And as Polina, I would see Russia's announcement to deploy nuclear weapons to Belarus as part of a wider move by Russia to increase the reliance on non-strategic nuclear weapons for regional deterrence. This trend has already begun before the war, but since then, Russia's emphasis on nuclear deterrence reached new heights, I would say. And I think it's fair to say that we can expect this reliance on nuclear weapons to continue for the foreseeable future as NATO holds conventional superiority. And so for NATO, the question then is, how should NATO respond to this nuclear saber rattling? And some observers argue for a rather symmetrical response and refer to the 1979 dual-track decision as a blueprint for NATO policy. And maybe for those of you who are not familiar with the dual-track decision and the Euromissile crisis, I will just try to give a brief recap on that. So in the 1970s, the Soviet Union had deployed modernized SS-20 intermediate range ballistic missiles that threatened targets across Western Europe. And as a response, NATO adopted the so-called dual-track decision in 1979, which on the one track envisaged the deployment of intermediate range cruise missiles and ballistic missiles to Western Europe, and on the other track called on the Soviet Union for arms control negotiations on both Soviet and US intermediate range missiles. 8 years later, in 1987, US President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev concluded these negotiations, and they signed the INF Treaty, the Treaty on Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, which banned the testing and deployment of all ground-launched missiles with ranges between 500 and 5,500 kilometers for the Soviet Union and the United States. And that treaty also led to the dismantlement and disarmament of hundreds of missiles on both sides. Now, today, once again, observers are advocating for NATO to deploy theater-range missiles or non-strategic nuclear weapons, or simply to introduce additional limited nuclear options in response to Russia's emphasis on nuclear weapons. And once again, the argument here is that this will provide an incentive for Russia to come to the negotiating table and sign an arms control agreement like the INF Treaty in the 80s. In a recent article for Transatlantic Policy Quarterly, Ulrich Kuhn and I took a closer look at this line of argument, and we explained why we are skeptical of a renewed dual-track approach. And this is also then what I have in mind for the rest of my remarks today. So I will look at how the United States and the Soviet Union got to the INF Treaty and what lessons we can learn from that experience for today. So in hindsight, we often regard the INF Treaty as the inevitable endpoint of a linear trajectory that followed from the dual-track decision in 1979 and NATO's deployment of missiles after 1983. But if we, when we took a closer look at how the INF Treaty came about, we found three aspects that are often underappreciated, and these are personalities, allies, and then the ambiguous understanding of weapons as bargaining chips. And I will elaborate on these 3 points. So let's talk about personalities first. Those calls for a renewed dual-track approach today often view arms control negotiations in a rather deterministic fashion, where decision makers have very little agency and where incentives basically dictate the negotiating outcome. But one could argue that it could only be Reagan and Gorbachev and really no one of their predecessors who concluded the INF Treaty. So Reagan was a Republican, a defense hawk, and a fierce anti-communist who despised detente and went as far as to call the Soviet Union the empire of evil. But Reagan was also a nuclear abolitionist that despised the orthodox thinking about nuclear deterrence and arms control. And likewise, Gorbachev was crucial for the success of the INF negotiations. He saw reductions in nuclear and later also conventional forces as necessary for the economic survival of the Soviet Union, and he did not shy away from confronting and sidelining his generals on that. And in terms of personalities, today's situation is of course very much different. As a Democrat, Biden has arguably less political capital for arms control negotiations. And more importantly, Putin no longer seems to share the Cold War understanding of arms control as a form of limited cooperation between adversaries in the shared interest of avoiding war and avoiding costly arms races. Instead, since the Russian diplomatic offensive in late 2021, Putin conflates arms control with the status of Ukraine, with NATO, and with other geopolitical issues. So I would say without a partner for arms control in sight, such a renewed dual-track approach could rather lead to a tit-for-tat cycle without any guardrails rather than another INF agreement. Second, let me talk about allies. From the beginning to its end, the dual-track approach was heavily contested among NATO allies. Several governments opposed the deployment of Pershing II missiles and ground-launched cruise missiles on their territory. And even those governments who agreed to deploy them faced fierce opposition in their parliaments and on the streets. And today, NATO member states are once again divided over the role of nuclear weapons in the alliance. So while Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki recently asked for Poland's participation in NATO nuclear sharing, Germany and the Netherlands, as well as Sweden, which will hopefully join NATO soon, sent observing delegations to the first meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Now, opening the question of additional nuclear weapons deployments would bring this divide to the forefront, and there's little doubt that Russia would exploit this lack of allied cohesion when it's displayed so publicly and so obviously. Allied cohesion is not only of great concern when it comes to the deployment, but also to the arms control part of the dual track. And this brings me to the third aspect to keep in mind, that is the ambiguous role of weapon systems. So in case of the INF treaty, the United States deployed the Pershing II and the ground-launched cruise missile with the goal of their inclusion and or disarmament, along with Soviet SS-20s in an arms control agreement in mind. Nonetheless, when the United States adopted the so-called 00 option as a negotiating position, that is, no INF-type missiles for both the United States and the Soviet Union, this negotiating position met strong opposition among allies. France, the United Kingdom, and most of all West Germany came to consider those missiles crucial for extended deterrence and had reservations about giving them up, even if the Soviet Union had to disarm its SS-20s as well. And throughout the Cold War, the rationale for weapon systems allegedly deployed to counter specific Soviet systems often evolved over time and across stakeholders. So while the purported reasons for those deployments were addressed through arms control agreements, these new capabilities then also became a staple piece for military planners, and as a result, those planners opposed their inclusion in any arms control agreements. And for example, ICBMs with multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles, or MIRVs, and sea-launched cruise missiles continue to plague arms control negotiations until today. Now, we can, of course, extensively discuss the military strategic merit of, say, additional nuclear weapons or long-range strike capabilities for NATO. I certainly have my views on that, as I'm sure many on the panel and in the audience do. But what I really wanted to hammer home in my remarks is that procuring and deploying weapon systems just for leverage in arms control talks with Russia is, under the current circumstances, unlikely to lead us to an arms control deal. Rather than creating incentives for arms control, it would risk openly displaying frictions in the alliance, and it would risk entering into a tit-for-tat cycle with Russia with no end in sight. And so if members of the audience are interested, I'm happy to talk more about conventional alternatives to a dual track approach in the Q&A. But for now, and mindful of the time, I will yield the virtual floor back to Valeria, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for such comprehensive speech. I will send just now the article of Tim and Ulrich Kuhn. You can read more in this article, so please, it's already there, I guess. And you can even look through quickly for the Q&A session also. So let's continue with the next speaker. Also, one of my best friends with whom we were defending our PhDs together side by side. It's Dr. Tatiana Mirnik. She is a non-resident fellow at the Odessa Center for Nonproliferation. Currently, she is an accredited parliamentary assistant on political affairs to the MEP Marek Balt. At the European Parliament. She holds a PhD in political science and has a MA degree in EU International Relations and Diplomacy Studies from College of Europe, and also a MA degree in International Relations from Odessa Mechnikov National University. Her scientific interests are nuclear weapons, strategy and policy, non-proliferation, disarmament in conjunction with European and Euro-Atlantic security. And I think that Tatiana will speak more about NATO approach, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, Tatiana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, as we've heard a little already about the NATO approach and what can or cannot be done, I will not go so much within my time, but would focus rather on a few issues. First of all, do you hear me well? Is the sound okay? Yeah, so I would like to refer to a few things. First is about the possible levels of nuclear cooperation. Second is about what is under the NPT possible or not possible. And third, how and or to which extent the Russian nuclear sharing is similar or not to the US nuclear sharing, and just a little at the end, we'll also refer to the UN NATO reaction in this regard. So at first, I think it is very important because when we say nuclear sharing, it can be, or like nuclear cooperation, more broadly speaking, it can be about many different things. And a number of countries here and there around the world have some kind of nuclear cooperation between each other. So I will just list a number of options that are done. For example, the very simple and known to many of us is extended deterrence. And extended deterrence, as was rightly also mentioned, in case of Europe and in other on other occasions, can be done both from the mainland and or from the territory of the allied state. So if we talk about the NATO case, then we have both, in fact, because we have the extended nuclear deterrence by the US from the US territory and the extended nuclear deterrence by the tactical weapons on the territory of Europe. That de facto strengthens, gives other options, both technically and politically, but both are two different kinds that are just combined for this purpose. For the purpose of defense of the alliance. Then we go to a technical thing of coordination of policies, or so-called consultation and planning, that, as we know, is done at the NATO level. And here it is an interesting question that was also partially raised by Polina, whether at the common state of Russia and Belarus, we will have something similar to that or not. And my guess is that the decision will still be at the side of Russia fully, but it would be also interesting to see to which extent such a mechanism that was developed through the years of work and cooperation at the NATO, and from which their program has started. It has started from the coordination and cooperation and specific systems and meetings, whether something like that or something similar will appear at the Russia-Belarus coordinated state. Then another part is about, and here there is one more particularity about the decision making. So who is taking the decision? As we know, in the data case, it's called like dual key, that both parties have to agree, the one that has deployed weapons and the one that controls the delivery and from whose territory the attack will be. How it will be in practice in Russia and Belarus, I think we can come back shortly to this at the end of my speech. Then the participation at the nuclear exercises or general exercises with nuclear component. We have seen that already for quite a while. Belarus was participating at the Russian exercises with the nuclear component. And there is the same practice in the West, more than that. When we even talk about the countries that do not host the US nuclear forces on their territory, they still, some of those fully non-nuclear member states, they still already in NATO participate in such nuclear exercises. And Poland is one of those examples. And we can also say that Norway is a great example of a defender of non-nuclear status that for years is one of the main forces that participate at the nuclear exercises. Then we talk about the training of allied personnel on how to use the tactical nuclear weapons, maybe, or any kind of nuclear weapons, however we call it for the case of war. And this is a very interesting question on to which extent training the personnel to use the arsenal that in theory, they do not have the access to unless there is a full-scale war with the use of nuclear weapons, is in compliance or non in compliance with the Treaty on Non-Proliferation. Then next point is about the agreement on possible use of a particular base or the territory for the ad hoc mission. Here we don't talk yet about the hosting of the nuclear arsenal, but we do talk about the possibility to use a particular place that is established, that has all the possibilities to be used as a base, but it will be used only in the case of necessity, ad hoc, in the case of war. And such arrangements are not usually very public, or we don't know much about those. But for example, with Sweden and Finland, there were clauses about the possibilities or perspectives for such a use. So how many more countries are ready to host the nuclear arsenal or be used as a field for the nuclear strike? Do we know that? That's an interesting question. And something that is well known and usually talked about as the full-scale stationary deployment of troops, or full-scale stationary deployment of the nuclear weapons that can stay under the control of the country that is deploying them, or can be fully given to that ally. According to the NPT, the first option, when they will stay under the full control of US or Russia or any other five official nuclear states, would be the one allowed, while transferring the full control over the weapon, and we will come to that there in a second, what that means, would be in violation. Last but not least, an interesting idea can be multilateral forces. And this is something that the US was exploring long ago in the 60s. And from what the negotiations between US and Russia have started on what will be allowed and what will not be allowed under the Treaty on Non-Proliferation. According to the treaty, such multilateral forces will, with joint command over the nuclear weapons, will not be allowed because it is not possible to transfer the nuclear weapon under a multilateral entity or any other recipient. Although, in case if there would be a United States of Europe, that we don't know if any day will happen, then there is a possibility of the succession. But the number of states over there will be 5, at 5 official owners of official nuclear weapon states. But you can, maybe one day one of those states will be United States of Europe instead of another member. Why I'm stressing so much about the fact that nuclear weapons shall not be transferred, because this was an exact language that was agreed upon between the USSR and US when drafting the articles of the NPT, because the transfer of nuclear weapon would then refer to bombs, to warheads, or any other kind of nuclear explosive device. So that doesn't refer to the delivery vehicles. And this is something as a clause that is used widely by the US, and as we see now, is more and more used by Russia. Another question at this point is whether it is fair, or whether there is such a term as fair in the international politics, to say and claim that US is in the violation of the NPT while negotiating the text of that NPT with the US earlier, some decades ago, in such a way that US nuclear sharing would be in line with it. And then, moreover, after some time or in a few years, do a very similar thing as deploying, by Russia, the nuclear vehicles, delivery vehicles, and now, as we assume, the nuclear warheads in Belarus. and saying, well, we are doing the same thing as the US have done and the West. The even more difficult question that I have, in fact, and I would like to share with you, is to which extent we can de facto trust that the nuclear sharing arrangements of Russia and Belarus would be as much up to the letter of the NPT safe, and they will never be under control any kind of possibility of the access of Lukashenko, who has already made some statements that he wouldn't hesitate to use them in case of the aggression. So as long as we assume that the scheme is in line with the NPT, he has no right or any kind of he should not have any tactical mean to have an access without the Russian control. And on the other hand, to which extent this can be an internal agreement of further problems, creating further challenges for the NPT, and creating a new bargaining zone when now Russia has something additional to come to the negotiation table and to treat with the West. While on the Western side, we have everything as it was more or less in the sense of nuclear sharing 20, 30 years ago. Plus, something that Russia is well aware about is the discussion of such countries as Germany, who maybe would not be in favor of keeping the nuclear weapons anymore on their territory, and the discussions have started in 2010. So my question on, while I share the concerns that Tim has raised, and I was happy to read your article as well, my question is to which extent this particular case is a classical scheme that Russia uses by preparing the setting of the negotiations in their favor before going there, and hoping that on the other hand, on the other side, the situation will stay the same and the West would need to go and give up something, while Russia will simply come back to the same level agreement as was before the negotiations. I have a few other things that came up to my mind, but I think as we are coming to the end, I will just briefly mention about the reaction. Yeah, I'm closely following the Polish reaction. I think that at least a rhetorics on willingness to have the nuclear weapons can be a good balancing power to the rhetorics of such countries as Germany, who say, well, maybe we don't need them anymore. And on the other hand, it was surprising to me that the EU response and the EU reaction, at least publicly, was even more active in this regard than the NATO one. But my assumption is that we are all waiting for the Vilnius summit. And I hope that there it will be articulated quite vocally, because if not, that for Russia will read it as giving up or losing this particular battle. Looking forward to the questions.
Thank you, Tatiana. So we have one more speaker, and after we will open Q&A session. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Natalia Melnik, who is a great supporter of the network. Dr. Natalia Melnik is currently head of the Ukrainian Civil Society Hub since March 2022. She is a PhD in political science. She graduated from Mechnikov National University of Odessa, Ukraine, and later from the Diplomatic Academy of Ukraine in Kyiv. Natalia has been working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine starting from 2000. Her work on the Ukraine-NATO cooperation was continued by the appointment to the mission of Ukraine to NATO. She was the third and second secretary in 2000, from 2008 till 2013, and back to the capital as the first secretary at the Directorate General of International Security, shortly followed by the recent work back at the mission of Ukraine to NATO in the capacity of the first secretary. So please, the floor is yours, Natalia. I'm sure you will tell us a lot of interesting and insightful things as a diplomat regarding Ukraine reaction to the Russian deployment. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you hear me well. Yeah? Okay. Valeria, first, many thanks for inviting me to this such an honorable society to speak. Thank you. After your introduction, I feel obliged to say something really wise. So it makes me a little bit nervous. But anyway, if I may, I would start with the state that, I'm supposed to speak about the Ukrainian reaction on the deployment of the tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. So Ukraine thinks that the statement of the Russian Federation regarding its intent to station tactical nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus is yet another provocative step by the Putin's criminal regime. And we are it's our official position. We will not skip right or left from it. We think that it undermines basic principles of the Treaty on Non-Proliferation Nuclear Weapons, the architecture of nuclear disarmament, and the international security system as a whole. Such intents cannot cause particular concern for the entire international community, as Russia delivers such statements under conditions of the continuation of unprovoked aggressive war against Ukraine. Despite horrific crimes against humanity already proved, and we are already in courts with claims against Russia for the time being, and also proved war crimes committed by Kremlin as a part of its aggressive war against a sovereign nation, against the civilian population, we think that Russia demonstrates its failure to prevail on the battlefield. So it tries to compensate its losses on the battlefield because the armed forces of Ukraine has gained within 5 weeks the territory that the Russians gained during all their parts in Ukrainian territory. So we think it's uncomparable, really. Ukraine appeals. What we can do? We appeal to the Belarusian society, also to the representatives of so-called Belarusian independent government temporarily stationed in Brussels, which is we appeal to all people of Belarus, of Russia, to prevent this criminal attempt to deploy the nuclear weapons, even tactical nuclear weapons, on the territory of Belarus, because it is, we think that it's a violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And we think that this step turns Belarus into country of the hostage of the Kremlin and lead to catastrophic consequences for Belarusians' future. Of course, we appeal to the countries of the Group of Seven, European Union, NATO, authorities, NGOs, in order to persuade Belarus, notwithstanding how what is our opinion about the Belarusian president, to not to do it, but we also expect effective measures to counter Kremlin's nuclear blackmail by the United Kingdom, China, USA, France, in particular, as permanent members of the UN Security Council, which bear primary responsibility for preventing threats of aggression with the use of nuclear weapons. And also, Ukraine calls on all members of the world communities to take a firm stance and strongly reject another nuclear provocations by Putin's regime and to take decisive measures to effectively deter and prevent any possible use of nuclear weapons by the aggressor state. And we see that Russia once again confirms a chronic inability to be a responsible processor of nuclear weapons as a means of deterrence and prevention of war, not as a tool of threats and intimidation. The world must unite against the one who threatens the future of civilization. It sounds a little bit high, but it reflects the truth. As for the Ukrainian official position for the time being regarding the future, as we see this future after we win, of course, the issue is that, sorry, it's a plane landing here. We live in the world as it is. And in this world, 95% of the United Nations membership does not possess nuclear weapons. Providing non-nuclear states with effective negative security guarantees should be considered as a top priority. So if we are threatened, we refused to be a nuclear state in exchange of guarantees. If now the world community doesn't really react on this kind of threat, it is a bad example, actually. It is an example for, let's say, not Ukraine, but other states to think about whether it is worth not to have nuclear weapons or it's better to have them. A bit provocative question, but it's reality that we live. So what Ukraine would like to do? We would like to have an establishment of new nuclear weapon-free zones, including the one in our region. And that will facilitate the non-proliferation regime. It will be helpful, we think so. So we are confident that Ukraine state will benefit from a transportation also of the CTBT into a forceful international legal instrument. The other long overdue task on our agenda is the immediate commencement of negotiations on FMCT, which is essential both to constrain nuclear proliferation and to advance the goal of nuclear disarmament, because this could really prepare such a zone of free nuclear weapon zone. And this is also considered as one of the suggestions of our president as a peaceful end of the war. But unfortunately, the latest steps of the President Lukashenko strongly contradicts with this possible measure. So what shall we do? Our position of Ukraine is very peaceful. But you know, we are very peaceful people until we are attacked. And I wish that our friends, our sincere friends, understand it very well. Yes, and I have some. I would like to talk about two more things. First, which is encouraging, although I can't tell about the final communique of NATO summit, but I hope that it will be in favor of Ukraine in that or another way, because at the doorstep both the NATO Secretary General and the President of the United States of America declared that the summit is considering the Ukrainian issue, and Ukraine should receive a concrete answer about its future possible path to NATO. Also, our president demands very strong and clear signal about it, exact date without membership action plan. But we're in a situation that when we are to be ambitious, probably. So to sum up, I would like to say that despite the endangering of possible use of nuclear weapons, Ukraine remains devoted to its non-nuclear state. At least for this date, the situation is like that. If I still have 1 minute, okay, because it is an answer to the question I found it about the deployment of the Russian tactical weapons in the Belarusian territory. This will require 3 stages. The first stage, yes, and to begin with this topic, I would like to say that still in Belarus, there are a number of nuclear facilities, stations for the nuclear weapons, and 5 of them were restored already. The stations from the Soviet period. And President Lukashenko is very happy to announce that they have repaired them. He reported it officially. Okay, we can trust him or not, but I'm not from the air civilians. But anyway, there is some capacities, and it is proved they have capacities. If they restore them, then can fly. So the first part should be right now, till in the first part of July, to the station of Potapine, if it's south from station Potapine to station Prudok in Belarus. 4 train cars and 1 escort car. Then within 1 month, it will be from West Siberian Railway, another 2 rail cars and 1 escort. And then 10, at least for the time being, last train cars will be sent in November 2023. As for the information that I have found, for the time being, only Iskander M systems are deployed in Belarus. Official proof that they have sent some train or any other mean of transportation of tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus. I didn't found. If someone did, please let me know. It's very, very burning talking for me. So I really thank you very much for your attention, and I am ready to answer your question if any. Thank you.
Thank you much, Natalia. It was a great speech. So no need to nervous. I liked it really much, especially, like the phrase like Ukrainians is a very peaceful nation, but better not to touch them. It's really so. So any bad news about Russian deployment or whatever, it's okay. We will overthrow it and will help NATO in the future to struggle with any, like difficulties. So yes, I want to.
Talking like the president of Ukraine, exactly his wording.
Really?
Yes. He said we are not afraid.
yeah, so maybe who knows, in 10 years I will be rich and will go for a president term. Thank you really much. I will open Q&A and discussion session. Please ask, comment, anything. It's a very friendly atmosphere, so you can ask and share all your thoughts, whatever. So please. Okay, yes, Елизавета.
Yeah, so hello everyone. I just wanted to say thank you to all the speakers, and I would address it to all the speakers, but Tim was mentioning the fact about the announcement of Polish Prime Minister that they will be interested in hosting nuclear weapons of NATO on their territory, and there was an immediate response. But do you think that Poland will try to send this message again? And do you think there will be, what are your assumptions about the NATO reaction to what Polish Prime Minister recently said? And I'm not sure if there was an immediate reaction, and if there was, I'm very interested in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Елизавета. Yes, maybe Tim wants to start to answer.
Yeah, sure. Good question. So I think this recent statement by the Polish Prime Minister was the most high-level statement on that. So there's been other statements by semi-officials or by the Polish president also a couple of months ago, where the Polish President Duda suggested that Poland would be willing to host US nuclear weapons under NATO nuclear sharing. And now this was, to my knowledge, the most high level and the most explicit call by Poland to participate in NATO nuclear sharing. I'm not aware of any concrete responses there, but I might have missed something. And I also don't think that that NATO would be willing, or the alliance as such would be willing to deploy warheads in Poland, at least with the Biden administration. That might change with another president in the future. But that's, of course, not the only option you would have in participating in NATO nuclear sharing. So short of having nuclear warheads stationed in Poland, what could be done, and what some Polish think tankers are suggesting, they say this would not be the preferred option. The preferred option would obviously be nuclear warheads in Poland. But something else could be that F-35 aircraft that Poland is getting from the United States, that these are certified for dual use, so that they could also carry nuclear warheads. Yeah, it's. I would say it remains to be seen how far that goes, and how NATO and the United States respond to that.
Thank you. Tatiana Melnik wanted to answer this one as well, as I know.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like also to set a little stage for you with the situation in Poland, because we are talking now that Poland is just in the year of elections, and all of the election processes have started at the beginning of this year and will be more or less over next spring. So every decision or every statement that we hear now from the officials or high officials is basically because we have a populist party ruling the country, is more or less reflecting the general public opinion in the country. So this is also something very important to keep in mind, that it's not only the idea of one political leader or one particular minister or one prime minister, but also from my experience of talking to different Polish people, it's basically the feeling of the nation as such. And it is escalated as well because of the previous Russian provocations at the Belarus-Polish borders, and that they sincerely feel the threat and being at the front line of the war. And this is exactly why. And also, as Polina has mentioned, I've also have come across a number of articles saying that if there would have been an attack these days as a provocation or escalation mean from Russia, most probably it will be Poland, maybe second option, one of the Baltic states. So because taking this all into account, it is a very rational and logical fear reaction of the Polish government to say, well, if we are to be for sure the target number one to be attacked, we also want to have something to give a quick response and to not think whether somebody else in Germany costing like tactical weapons will be ready to agree with the American decision to use them. So this is explainable, but the fears are also there that as soon as you start the escalations and go on the ladder, it is very difficult to stop. And it is very risky to put the whole situation of international security under question. The other more practical aspect to this is coming back to this discussion in the beginning of 2010 about which countries would like to keep the tactical nuclear weapons of the US and which won't. And the big problem there was mentioning that if some countries like Germany now don't want to host the nuclear weapons anymore, and there will be an agreement allowing them to get rid of that, then the number of countries willing will be so limited to increase the risks for those countries and put the whole pressure, on the other hand, from Russia on those countries. Now, when we see that there are other countries and this another group of countries who say, well, if you don't want to host that weapon, well, we do want. This brings another kind of perspective to the situation and other, at least possible risks of the solution. And at the nuclear game, that is always very important. And as you've mentioned, I also, and this was the reasoning behind me starting my speech with a number of different options on the table, because we are quite often thinking about there will be nuclear weapons on the territory or there won't be nuclear weapons on the territory. But there are so many shades of gray from which we can choose and which can send this signal that we care, we see your actions in Belarus and we will respond, but not necessarily in the way that will provoke you for the war.
Thank you, Tatiana. We have two more questions. So the first one from Javed Alam, please.
Hi, can you hear me? Am I audible? Okay, thank you. Actually, my question is to Tim, actually. First of all, congratulations, it was an excellent presentation. Tim, I mean, as we all discussing that how the Russians have followed something different in terms of, placing their tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. So how do you assess this particular situation from the point of view of global non-proliferation agenda? And also, how do you see, how do you see its impact? I mean, Russia's placing of tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, its impact on the future conflicts in terms of, let's say, if something happens between the United States and China over Taiwan. Do you think, or do you see that the Chinese will also follow this kind of pursuit in placing their nuclear weapons in a different territory, just in order to counter, the American influence in Taiwan, or what's your take on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting questions. So first, maybe on the impact or on the whether this is compliant with the NPT or with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So the Russian argument usually goes that, okay, NATO is doing that, NATO has nuclear sharing, and so we're just copying, we're just doing what the United States and NATO is doing. but I would say that this argument does not really hold up. The Soviet Union, in the negotiations of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Soviet Union agreed to this, to NATO nuclear sharing, to this practice, because both the United States and the Soviet Union agreed that this is a measure to ensure nuclear non-proliferation, because the concern was that were it not for NATO nuclear sharing, Western European states like West Germany would proliferate and would have their own nuclear weapons. And so that's why both parties had, and both the Soviet Union and the United States had an interest in nuclear sharing as a non-proliferation measure, so to speak. And now with Belarus, the situation is way different, I would say. We don't have a proliferation threat with Belarus, and so this logic, I would say, does not apply there. But then again, I'm not an expert in international law, but from what I understand, these are usually the assessment of the, this is usually the assessment on the impact and about the compliance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And your second question, I think, is really interesting, whether China could potentially copy this practice. For now, I don't really think that would be a viable practice for China. This situation between Russia and the relationship between Russia and Belarus is very close, and for China, I don't really see any instance where China could copy this practice and without putting nuclear warheads in a really vulnerable environment where they could be easily taken out by US first strikes. So yeah, from a military perspective or from a military strategic perspective, I don't think it would make a lot of sense for China. But then, yeah, who knows what the Chinese calculus might be, and it also, I would say, depends to a large degree on how this plays out in Europe and how this plays out in Belarus. So if we handle this wrongly, of course, China might draw the wrong lessons from this.
Thank you, Tim. Tatiana, you want to add something to this question, or?
Yeah, just one sentence on each. So on. Yeah. So about the violating of the NPT, this is also why we take a look at the text and why the discussion is there, and discussion was risen lately, surprisingly or non-surprisingly, by Russia on whether nuclear sharing arrangements is in violation of the NPT. The usual response of the lawyers is that to the largest extent, it can be translated as behaving in the bad spirit of the NPT, but de facto, letter by letter, what does NATO is okay. The question is that the devil is in details how the particular structure of nuclear sharing between Russia and Belarus will be done, and to which extent it will also follow all the letters of the NPT as agreed between Russia and US when negotiating it. And the other question about China, I think it's also it unties the hands of China maybe one day in the future. As from my perspective, I've also didn't see any signs of China willing to do something in that regard here and now. Aside from one nuance, that it strengthens the call of China to all the parties to violate the practice of using extended nuclear deterrence and nuclear sharing. So this plays in hands of China, that now the only comments that they've made is that we have always been saying that nuclear sharing is a bad idea. And in such a sense, and in such a way, they also strengthens the Russia's narrative that, well, US has it, why others won't have it.
Thank you. Lucien, please, your question or comment?
No, it's a question. How do you estimate the likelihood that Russia might also deploy nuclear weapons to other territories that it might seek to put under its extended deterrence or increase its control over, such as Abkhazia or occupied territories in Ukraine? And maybe the second question would be, given that Belarus is not too far away from a quite large popular revolution, what would be possible or likely implications if another revolution or change of government due to popular pressure would suddenly occur?
I guess it's a question for everyone. Yes? Okay, so Tatiana, Team Natalia, who wants to start?
Let me, if I may.
Yes, of course.
I thank you so much for this very, this question is the question probably each Ukrainian asks him or herself every day or a couple times a day. As for, if we talk about tactical weapons that is delivered by, let's say, planes or Iskander systems or something like that, yes, it can be deployed easily on any occupied territories of Ukraine, of Abkhazia, of any territories that Russia has a control of. If we talk about something really serious, then, for example, like I told, in Belarus, there is a capacity. Some capacities are still in the eastern part of Ukraine. I don't know what is the state of them, because it requires a lot of money and force to keep them in order. But of course, it endangers the situation, and first of all, it endangers the psychological situation of the whole population. And we can talk very lonely as experts about that even the use of tactical weapons, even in the middle of Kiev in Ukraine now, or within, I don't know, nearest future, we cannot predict for long term, will not really change the situation on the ground for the Russian forces. Why? Because the Ukrainian forces are not really accumulated at one spot. They are along the very long territory. And the explosion of a tactical nuclear weapon is limited to the territory. If I'm not mistaken, it's 15 kilometers wide. So to really change the situation, I strongly doubt it helps. And please allow me one sentiment, because I clearly remember, because it is now compared to Hiroshima and Nagasaki many times, at least in press and in videos, the possible tactical strike on Ukraine. The tactical strike on Japan was done in the end of the Second World War in order to persuade the Japanese that whatever they do, they cannot continue like that. But in Ukraine, it's a little bit opposite situation, and it's a national psychology. It's a national psychology. We cannot do nothing with that. The more we are pressed, the more resistant we are becoming. And I tell it not as an official, I tell it as a Ukrainian, because I don't stand any pressure. So if they dare to do it, my sincere dream is that Moscow is burnt out at all. So it's a very, very tricky, and for the use of tactical weapons, really, Ukraine is too big to be destroyed from Belarusian side. But in case they really somehow, I don't know, technically it's not possible, but if in case they somehow invent how to use the strategic nuclear weapon in Kiev, then it is for the whole Europe. then we are all done. I'm sorry if I not directly answered your question. Yes, in theory, it is very possible to deploy any kind of weapon by the Russian Federation, especially without the change of this regime, on any territory that is subordinate to the Russian Federation. Absolutely possible. And I absolutely agree with my sincere colleague Tatiana that according to, if we go word by word about NPT treaty, there is no contradiction until there is a path of rights to rule these tactical weapons. So they can be deployed, but if there is not a transfer of authority, no lawyer will agree to go to the court with this claim. And of course, the unpredictable state endangers the situation in the whole region. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Luciana, I was thinking the same question. So I understand, like, yeah, and I want just to add like a few words. That I was thinking that it's like the talks about this issue about the deployment at other territories is highly possible, because it can be like a blackmailing tool in negotiations with the West, and like to use it like don't even think to deploy anything in Poland or whatever. Otherwise, we will deploy also, and we will do this nuclear sharing policy further. So I guess it's quite possible, but mostly like blackmailing tool, because it's also, I guess, quite expensive thing and needs a lot of, energy, financing, controlling. So it can be done only like in such regard. But Tatiana Melnik, I guess she wanted to add something in this regard.
Yeah,
and
also
other questions. Yeah.
Also to be very quick on that, I share your fears about the possible destabilized situation in Belarus in case there are nuclear weapons, even owned originally or controlled by Russians. On the other hand, we've seen in Ukraine how fast Russia can be in case there are some changes to withdraw their tactical nuclear weapons, as it was in 90s from the territory of Ukraine that even our president didn't know about. So it has pros and cons, and of course the risks. As we know, also Belarus had a note of nuclear-free state status, and they had to make a referendum to show that now they have a change. The referendum has supported the president, but we all also know how the referendums and the elections are done in Belarus. So to which extent it truly represents the people, we don't know. And last but not least, about sharing with others, it's a good question that I've also taken a little search about, and as I know, President Lukashenko has said that he will be happy to share with our nuclear weapons with everyone who is happy to join the joint state. And there were already some reactions from such countries as Kazakhstan saying, thank you, no thank you, we have a nuclear-free zone and we're happy with that, and without your nuclear weapons and your joint state.
Thank you, Tanya. We have last two questions because we already run out of time, but you're all here, so thank you. We will continue with 2 questions more. Please, Professor Haluk. Oh, sorry.
Excuse me. Thank you very much for valuable presentations, insightful presentations. My question might be related to Ms. Natalia Melinik. As you know, in last Friday, your Ukrainian President Mr. Zelensky and our President Mr. Erdogan has met in Istanbul, and they negotiated the general issues in the Black Sea region. And then our president, as a NATO allied member, Mr. Erdogan declared that Ukraine deserves NATO membership. Now, my question is, what do you think about the reactions of Western counter leaders about this statement? Ukraine deserves NATO membership for future protection of Ukrainian people, as you know. What do you think? What do you predict the reactions of Western leaders about this issue, this problem? Especially, I wonder the thoughts of Ms. Natalia Melinik. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Haluk. Natalia?
Many thanks for this question addressed to me. Thank you so much. It's a great honor that you listened to me carefully. I don't have, honestly, the official position in this regard, so I will tell my point of view, my personal point of view. This is a very strong signal for the whole Ukrainian people, and I think that President Zelensky is happy with that result of going to Turkey with an official visit, because not any kind, but such statements, especially done by such a respected member of the international community like Turkey, and his president, Mr. Erdogan, is a great sign that despite strong or some commercial relationship with Russia, Turkey agreed to support Ukraine's path to NATO membership. For us, it's very important. It is like, a breeze that we are supported by one or another countries, because very honestly, our diplomatic service is going from one in each and every country of NATO and is begging for support of our NATO membership. As for the reaction of Russia, of course, it is negative, because they are sure that Turkey is their devoted friend and partner, especially in nuclear facilities, the atomic stations and that kind of facilities. So I think it is not the great news for Russians. Whether it can influence the situation on the ground, on the battlefield, no, not really, because our army is doing what it has to and what it can, and the Russian army is doing also bad, but it does not have really an impact on the battlefield as it is on the ground. As for Ukraine deserves NATO membership, that is exactly probably what our president wanted to hear from Mr. Erdogan. So he was happy. As for the reaction of the NATO community, I think it's a very strong signal, because Turkey is a very respectful contributor to all NATO operations, missions, civilian and military staff, and all that kind of things. And there are some countries that are really listening to its position. Whether it helps us in Vilnius, I wish it does, but I think that the decisions and the strong formulations were already made. So let's hope it helps us.
Yeah.
So I hope I answered. If not fully, please fix me.
Yeah, thank you, Natalia. I want a small, like, it's not question, maybe even. I was also like reading about the possibility of becoming a member, and of course, everyone tells that at the moment it is impossible because of the war in the country. But I read the issue that it's possible, but to include now, like, not the full Ukraine, but partly like controlled territories of Ukraine at the moment, and other part like after war finished. So is it real, like, to do like this?
For this, you really need a strong political willingness, and you know that NATO is an alliance that requires the single vote of everyone.
Yep.
And unfortunately, for the time being, we have some countries that still would like to make a great friends of Russian Federation, and they do everything. And what is even worse, they have a very strong Russian lobbies in the countries, and this of course complicates our life. In theory, yes, it's possible. In practice, we will see, but I think not today in Vilnius.
Little bit later, yeah. Thank you. Okay, the last but not least question from Елизавета Khodorkovska.
Actually, I wanted, if you let me, to jump back to Lucian's question, because for me it was very interesting and I thought a bit about that. And I wanted to, like, I liked, as Tatiana said about the UN member states, which were post-Soviet countries like Kazakhstan or Central Asian states. They clearly send the message that they don't want to host any of Russian nuclear weapons on their territory, while Belarus is clearly addressed Russia, telling that they are more than happy to have that. And then you also mentioned territories like Abkhazia or occupied Ukrainian territories. I think in case with Abkhazia or territories like that Russia was occupying for a long time now, those states are clearly showing that they don't want to comment Russia's invasion to Ukraine at all. And as like the deployment of their nuclear weapons is connected with the Russia's aggression in Ukraine, they just don't, there was no single comment from them in this regard. And then with occupied Ukrainian territories, I think that we should not underestimate the fact that Russia actually understands that counteroffensive is possible. And then in this regard, it will be quite risky to put any nuclear weapons on the current occupied territories, because I'm sure that Russia understands that these occupied territories may very soon again become Ukrainian, and then it will be very complicated to actually take the nuclear weapon they will put there out of there when the territories are back under Ukrainian control, or during the fights on the ground there. Yeah, just, I mean, I was thinking about that too. So
Thank you much. Okay, I guess it's time to finish. I hope you are not tired. And I want to thank everyone for participation, for all, especially all speakers, for finding your time, because I know that it's July, vacation time, it's hot. I was moderating this session from Mallorca. So which is also a special session for me. So thank you much. It's really important to talk about it. I know that there are a lot of events about this topic and talks around it, but I'm sure that every time we learn more, we have new thoughts, we have new ideas for articles. Every question means a progress for us and in these topics. And these times are really hard for the non-proliferation regime, for disarmament regime, for arms control. We are living really in interesting time where we can change a lot, maybe each of us, because who knows, maybe someone will write an article which can be, I don't know, a part of the policy of some country. So thank you much for this. We will have another round of NucTalks at the end of August. And it will be something very interesting and special also, even more than maybe today, because we will have atomic bombing survivor from Japan. like Hikabusha, maybe you heard about these people who survived atomic bombing, and she will share with us everything connected with this. She is very popular among these Hikabusha, so please look at our website, Twitter, follow us. We will announce it. I guess it will be last days of August, something like this. The time most probably the same. We have a great message from Jenny Grommel, a great supporter of the network and all of us. So yeah, you can see, yeah, what an incredibly useful, insightful session to have your very expert thoughts on the critically important priorities we share. Helps me so much in official meetings and private conversations. Your voices are heard and characterized. Grateful to Valeria, thank you for her hard work, but also for Natalia, because she is the person who created this one. So I'm a moderator, but all the time she does a lot of work really for NucTalks and network. So yeah, thank you, Jenny. I won't take time. You can read the kind message from Jenny. Thank you, Hannah Shepel. She also she has a bad internet, so she can't join us. So one more time, thank you much. And my colleagues from IFSH today, there were a lot of colleagues from IFSH. Thank you for supporting this. And thank you, team, one more time. I hope you will join our network also. So yes. Oh, I need to stop recording. Okay.
You stop